I had the displeasure of seeing the inside of an abandoned facility buried underneath Antarctica. I learned about this website for a friend who told me that this used to be a good place for secret info and exposing things that the government does not want you to know, but that the quality of the site had gone down drastically in recent years. Nowhere else I tried to post my experience were interested in listening to me, and my post even got taken down a couple of times before they realized nobody cared anyway. I am not expecting too much, but I figured I'd give posting here a try. I've seen a few Greentext before, which, by the way, I had no idea came from the site and thought it was just a general internet thing, and my friend told me how to post here, so I figure I'll just dump the story and go. This is pre-typed, by the way, so any questions will have to wait until the end. I am a leading researcher in my field who specializes in molecular biology. You wouldn't know who I am if I mentioned my name, and I would like to keep at least some details private anyway. Around 4 years ago-ish that this took place. Back in March of 2020, the world had been locked down for maybe a week or so at this point. I was a little surprised that we were being called in for any kind of research project, considering the state of the country, and that we were not legally allowed to leave our homes, but I suppose that this was much more important. I was flown in for a briefing in Colorado to a military base, but I will not mention which one. All I will say is that the base is quite large for military standards, and that some parts of it are built into the earth and are stationed underground. I had never been to any kind of military base before in my life, so this was all new to me. I stepped off the plane and was feeling a little anxious. The place felt quite imposing. I went through some thorough security checks, but sped through them pretty quickly. Once I was cleared, I was escorted by a uniformed officer for a few tight corridors. After a while of walking, my escort ushered me into a tiny side room that I didn't even notice was there at first. The corridor leading into the place was trashed and looked like absolute crap. Boxes of computer parts and scattered papers were basically just dumped everywhere. The room itself was pretty pristine though. I was greeted with the faces of 3 people who I was not familiar with. They were all scientists from varying fields, mostly related to biology or chemistry. I think it was the longest meeting I have ever had to sit through. I struggled to even stay awake for most of it. I can't really share the details here, mainly because it would take half of my life to type out, but also, I don't want to risk getting deleted for saying the wrong thing. The only reason I feel safe enough sharing this is because of how unbelievable it sounds, to the point where most average people would not consider it a leak. Here is how I will sum up the meeting. Me and 2 other researchers, along with 1 military escort, would be flying out to Antarctica. They had found an old research center buried underneath some ice, and they wanted us to try and recover as much as we could from it, and then try our best to get it set up and ready for work again. They gave us a vague time frame of a couple of weeks, but realistically, we would have however long it would take, as long as it was not a lost cause. Most of the time, researchers would be shipped out to Antarctica, but this was considered a high priority, and so we took a 2-hour flight from Chile, and then would take a ship the rest of the way from King George Island. I felt extra nervous when we first touched down, and I took that first step. The weather conditions were not great, and the cold was biting. I won't lie, I immediately had second thoughts upon seeing this place for the first time. Something inside me just felt this weird sickness that I can't describe that made me want to run all the way back home. We had the debriefing, sure, but I actually really didn't know all that much about this place. I was technically the lead researcher, but I knew just as much as these other researchers, and even having a guide did not fill me with too much confidence. I only accepted the job offer because I needed money quite desperately. The pandemic meant I was not going to be able to work on much of anything, and the type of contract I had basically meant I was going to be screwed for money. Being a scientist does not pay. You are disposable. They treat you like shit, and they give you millions of stipulations to snatch away any grant money or terminate your contract as soon as they get what they want. This money basically ensured I wouldn't have to take up a shitty part-time supermarket job, and I could live normally without worrying until everything blew over. 1 gig and my worries would be gone for a brief time. The journey was horrendous. Once our ship arrived, we had to make an almost 5-mile trek in the blistering snow and wind to get to the location of the base. It was incredibly out of the way, and it was a wonder it was ever uncovered at all. We were prepped for the trek, of course, but it did not make it sting any less. The tiredness from flying from my home state to Colorado and then traveling here was enough without the long journey. I'd be lucky to not collapse and call it a night as soon as we got to the place. After over 2 hours, the base was finally looming in the distance. That's what our guide told us anyway. To me, it just looked the same as the last 5 miles of endless white fury stretching across my vision. There were a few red flags planted as sorts of markers to help guide us, along with the GPS tracker that we had along with us. It looked like something you'd see at a ski resort. The place had apparently been abandoned for decades. They had no idea of the origin of the base or the purpose of it. They guessed it was for some kind of atmospheric research or research into the surrounding waters, but we had no way to know for sure without us completing our mission. The country of origin was unknown as well, so anything we found there might not even be in English. We were told in the briefing that the place had been found by explorers, buried underneath layers of snow and ice, but they were able to carve out enough room for us to rappel down safely. Standing over the edge and looking at it filled me with something I can't really describe, something I have never felt before. Intrigue, maybe, but I don't think that quite cuts it. I had never really been interested in anything like this, secret government projects or what might really be going on under the surface, but I was really feeling it now. Something about the place was off though. There was this kind of eerie silence. The place wasn't actually silent because of the strong wind constantly blasting me in the ear, but it's like it just became background noise and my ears became deaf to it. I don't know. It made me feel uneasy, like no one was actually supposed to ever be here. Antarctica in general, I mean. I could not even hear the sound of my own steps, due to the snow concealing and softening the steps. I stood over the edge and peered over, but only for a second, and then pulled back. I had to try really hard to not think of the descent. I'm scared of heights. Sue me. I was the last to go. I practically forced my colleagues to go before me. I sat on the ground while they went down, and kind of half listened to the guide teaching me how rappelling down would work and how the equipment worked. It's not something I had ever done before. I was basically allergic to any kind of physical labor. I could not put it off for very long, and it was finally my turn to go down. I tightened the harness around myself, and I had to just kind of steel myself. I had the guy going down with me at the same time, so that added comfort helped ease my nerves just a slight touch. It was enough to get me over the line anyway. It was over before I knew it, and our boots touched down on the ground. I stepped through the doors of the abandoned research station, and had my nose assaulted by some kind of putrid scent. It was like musty and heavy in the air, and smelled like something had died. The inside of the place was really dark, and so we had to rely solely on our headlamps to see anything. The layout of the station was weird, and didn't really make any sense. It wasn't like any research station I had ever been inside, and things were not where you would expect them to be from a convenience standpoint. The walls were also coated with layers of frost and ice, and everything was either frozen or falling apart. It felt like one touch to anything would cause it to turn into a pile of dust, if not for the freezing temperatures. The floors had shit thrown all over, and it was just such a mess. It was like someone had purposefully trashed the place before they left, rather than natural decay. There were a few rows of abandoned computers, but the screens were cracked, and it was obviously a lost cause before we even stepped into the place. Even without knowing how long ago the base was abandoned, any hope of recovering any kind of technology or digital data was basically at 1% maximum. It was physical records that we were hoping for. Thankfully, we did find a series of documents. The pages of some were just scattered haphazardly across the floor, and so it took us a while to piece some of the files and documents together, and large portions of some were just nowhere to be seen in the main area that we were in. The ones that we did find were yellowed with age, but they were still legible. Not really to me though. The documents were transcribed in some kind of code that I would not have a chance in hell of ever cracking, along with stretches of black of what I assumed was redacted information. The fact that even hidden behind a code, it was considered too secret to be risked, was definitely a little worrying. It definitely piqued my interest too. I guess this was one of the reasons for the guide we were given. Perhaps he knew how to decode some of these documents and would maybe just give us the bare minimum that we needed to be aware of. Either way, it wasn't something I could really do anything about. I still sifted through the pages for a while, hoping that maybe I would have some revelation out of nowhere and figure something out, but no such luck on that front. I was able to parse a few scraps of information from the documents, and when I say scraps, I mean scraps. I obviously did not crack any of the coded information, but some of the names of the research projects were left completely readable to anyone. By that, I mean like with the name Project MKUltra, just names like that, which did not give anything away. That was not one of them on the document though. I assumed that's why they were left alone. Nothing of importance could be gleaned from just the project names, and it's not like a Google search of the names would reveal anything either. I can't remember all of the names that I saw, because I never got the chance to note them down. But a couple did stick in my head, either because they sounded strange, or because I had seen the name before somewhere. One was called Paperclip, which I had seen referenced before on Twitter and stuff, but I did not know too much about it. I have no idea if it was the same thing I'd seen talked about before either. The others that I could recall were Chickwit, Search, and Often. They mean nothing to me, but someone with more knowledge and connections than me might be able to reveal something about them. They lingered in my mind, but I basically ignored the documents at that point and just passed them over to our guide. The other two researchers who were with me, who I will just call J and C instead of their actual names, were just chatting nonsense to each other and would not shut up. Just talking generally about the place and how surprising it was and that kind of stuff. It was just general NPC shit. Our guide was humoring them and listening to them in between looking at the files I had handed over to him. I did not want to wait around, so I decided I would look deeper into the place and hopefully recover some more missing files at the very least. I was under the impression that the team who had dug the place out had performed at least a preliminary investigation of the place, and so it must be relatively safe. I did not see any harm in looking around. The lighting was abysmal, to the point that even with headlamps, I was struggling to properly see. I think there must have been something up with my headlamp because the beam of light kept flickering and fading every so often. Every time it flickered, I kept seeing these weird long shadows that stretched around corners, and the flickering of the headlamp made it seem as if they were moving slightly. It looked as if the shadows of my limbs were too long and droopier somehow. I had this weird feeling in the pit of my stomach, but ignored it as I just assumed it was some lingering anxiety from earlier. I continued walking down some of the hallways until I started to hear something strange. I could hear this weird pitter-patter of footsteps that were almost too quiet to make out. I brushed them off, just thinking they were the other researchers or our guide messing around. I was way too jumpy for no reason, but they really did seem purposefully soft, like it was being done on purpose. The rhythm of them was weird and irregular, like the person making them had a limp or had a strange gait. They faded eventually, but I heard them again every so often, accompanied by a slight rustling sound. I convinced myself I was just hallucinating things due to the almost absence of silence that I had suffered through for hours and that my brain was now making up for it. I rounded the corner and saw a weird door. It was kind of like a bulkhead door that you would see on a submarine. It looked like it could withstand some heavy pressure. It was shut, but not fully clicked into place, and so was not locked or fully sealed. I figured that maybe the crew who dug up the place had taken a peek inside and not shut the door correctly. Either that, or it was left like this when it was abandoned. I decided that I may as well take a look inside and get used to my surroundings. That same horrible smell hit me again when I opened the door. That exact same smell that hit me as soon as we walked into the station. The scene in front of me was even more of a mess than the main chamber. It was like some weird cluster of parts of computers and wires and papers all mashed together, like it was some sort of makeshift nest. The papers were torn completely to shreds, and some of the computers either had pierced screens or claw marks down the side of them. They were like those old monitors with the fat backs, and they were embedded in there. The lighting was still terrible, so I moved closer into the room and gave my headlamp a smack to try and get it to stop flickering for once. I put my nose under my jacket as I did, because I could not handle that horrible smell anymore. The sight that I saw instantly made me recoil and feel sick. There was like some weird clutch of eggs stuck in the pile of trash and computers. They did not look like any eggs I had ever seen before, probably larger than an ostrich egg in size, and they had some kind of thick goo-like substance splattered over them and hanging off of them. It gave off some kind of otherworldly glow that I could not take my eyes off of. The goo on them was making me feel sick just looking at it. It was viscous and stringy. I figure this must have been the source of the horrible smell. I ran straight back to J&C and our guide to tell them what I had found. I actually felt my heart start pounding in my chest, as I had no idea what to make of what I saw. I had some of that horrible goo on my shoe now too, and it almost made me fall on the way back. I could feel the sick feeling reaching my mouth. I reached them quickly enough, and all of the words just came out of my mouth at once. My breath was kind of ragged from the running, as I am not the fittest, and so talking normally was quite difficult. I eventually managed to get the words out after calming down slightly. That is when we started to hear noises. Not like footsteps like before. It was like a moan, a deep and guttural moan. It wasn't incredibly loud at first. It was low and constant before growing in intensity. I could hear the phlegm in the throat of whatever was making it. It eventually cracked and became high-pitched before stopping. None of us had any words to offer. We did not even look at each other. We were just fixed on the hallway that the sound was coming from. The first thing we saw appearing out of the darkness were some spindly, jagged front legs. They looked to be somewhat similar to mantis arms, except much longer. The limbs seemed to grow and stretch with each movement. The limbs were gigantic, and once it poked its head through the darkness, we saw that it was crawling along the ceiling while hanging upside down. It just kept coming, and moved so unnaturally. Its limbs kept bending and flexing in ways that did not make sense. The whole thing did not make sense. Eventually, it crawled completely out of the darkness, and we could see the whole thing. Its eyes had this sort of green glow, and the skittering sound that its limbs made when moving along the ceiling made me shiver. This whole experience seemed to last for a lifetime, and we were all just stuck there, unable to move. I don't know how long we actually stood there for though. Seeing the thing was like a nightmare. It was some twisted amalgamation of flesh and bone that I could not entirely make out. Its skin was mottled and looked almost diseased. It had some kind of weird markings on its body that I caught a glimpse of, but I could not make out what they were. Our guide was still beside me, fiddling with something. I figured possibly sending a distress signal. I heard C let out a scream all of a sudden. She just suddenly managed to break out of the trance, and she started running for her life. She could not even make it halfway across the room. The thing took a swipe at her and sent her flying into the wall. It killed her instantly. I can still hear that horrifying splat sound in my mind, over and over again. I could not look. The second I saw bits of her slowly sliding down the wall, I had to look away. Jay had freaked out when he saw this, and ended up basically cornering himself with no way out. He instinctively ran to help C, even though there was nothing left. The guide pulled me aside and told me that there was nothing we could do. He had no idea if he could even hurt it, and pulled me to run. He told me that it was better for us to run with the files than for everyone to die for no reason. That is how I justify it to my guilty conscience at night, at least. The thing instantly focused on Jay once it saw them move across its eyeline. It didn't pounce or make any sudden movements this time. It moved slowly towards him, and the guy dragged me away before we could see anything more disturbing. Jay did not even call out to us. I guess he just gave up. We made our way out without making any sudden movements. We couldn't hear anything over the still howling wind when we got outside. It did not chase us. We never saw it again. We ran a lot of the way back, but we ended up tiring out pretty quickly. It was a long and frantic journey home. We both relayed our versions of events and gave written testimony. The reactions we got from the higher-ups were mixed, to say the least. I don't know if they all truly believed us, or what. I have no idea what happened to the thing, or if anyone else ever went back there. I don't know if they gave up and settled for what files we could give them. They made me sign about 1,000 NDAs and gave me maybe half of the money that I was promised. They told me it was because I didn't fully complete the job, like that was my fault. I kind of just don't go anywhere anymore and just sit in my apartment all day. It's been over 4 years now, so I doubt they'd bother with me, if they would even see this here. But yeah, I'm sorry I don't have any more details or a better conclusion than that. Your guess is as good as mine for whatever that thing was. I've been meaning to share a bunch of stories with X, but I just haven't had any time. I used to assist police investigators with specific crimes. I will tell you about a 100% true case I worked on in Houston. I will drop enough clues so you can Google the case for yourself if you want, but just know that there is way more to it than you will ever find in any newspaper. 6 years before the pandemic. Summer. Heights neighborhood. An older woman goes missing. Case goes cold. I am brought in years later when there is a sudden break in the case. When I come in, I conduct a little private investigation and discover a few things. The Heights has long been gentrifying. As a result, high-rises have begun to spring up all over the place. One company in particular bought up a bunch of land around the missing woman's home. This company slowly bought out many local residents, basically snatching up their houses and clearing the land for development. The woman who went missing was actually one of the last holdouts. She was pretty old and had been living there for decades, comfortably. She did not want to give up her home, but the company was not backing down. Essentially, a high-rise was built around the woman's house, closing her in on all sides. She was cut off from her other neighbors, and nobody noticed when she went missing. They did notice when a for sale sign went up in front of her house though. They began asking questions at that point. A representative from the apartment complex actually responded to these inquiries. The old woman is probably dead. Strange response, right? Anyway, the house is sold. A new family moves in. They are remodeling the home when they tear out a wall. In the wall, they find a skeleton. The old woman, I was told, had apparently been murdered and her body stuffed in the walls. Police want to know, how in the fuck did this happen? And who did it? All of this you can find in Houston papers. Here is the weird bit, and it will sound like total fiction, but there are a number of other cases that I uncovered with similar details. Anyway, I spoke with virtually everybody in the department and heard one thing from someone who I will not name. According to the source, there was something off about the skeleton. The coroner's report says one thing, but the facts say another. I was never allowed to look at the skeleton. Like I said, there is much more to it than what I have time to share, but if you ask me, that's plenty to chew on. I turned that over for weeks, and I found several similar cases throughout the Houston area, from the west side to the east. In fact, I will share a quick one. Again, you can find this with a Google search. Several months after I am brought in, there is another case I happen upon randomly. Totally different part of town, the port. A man's body is discovered on a golf course. The body is very badly decomposed, hint hint. I'm told the police have tracked the movement of the body and that it had been initially stored in a storage facility nearby. The police story goes like this. 2 men have a dispute. One man murders the other. The murderer takes the body and hides it in a storage facility. Then, for some inexplicable reason, he moves the body to a golf course. This all sounds like total bullshit to me. I look around and can find no evidence that the body was ever in the storage facility. Moreover, the owner of the storage facility is dead and has been for some time. I am thinking, this seems like a very convenient way to close the case. You find a body, you say it came from a dead guy's storage unit, and since he is dead, you cannot investigate. End of story. And in case you didn't catch it, how on earth does the body move from the storage facility to the golf course if the murderer is fucking dead? God damn, this really riled me up thinking about it again. Sorry if that last post was rambling. I found case after case like this just not making any sense at all. Eventually, I was let go, but I continued following the crime in Houston as a result of my stay there. 2019. Man's body is found in the street, practically in the heart of downtown. The body looks to have been dead for some time. 2021. Skeleton is found in the Montrose area. A family finds it in their backyard, pretty badly decomposed. 2022. Northwest Houston. Skeletal remains are found in an abandoned building. Appeared to be a man who had been living there, so maybe homeless. The funny thing about this story is that there are still inconsistencies that you can find in the newspaper articles. The police were told there was a body out behind a motel, but when the police show up, they said it was a skeleton inside an abandoned building. So a body turns into a skeleton in a matter of minutes, according to newspapers. A quote about the skeletal remains. Investigators believe the body had been in the building for a long time. I called a contact from my previous time there. They told me that the building is often used by police for drug stings. The police had been there numerous times before that skeleton was ever found, and nobody ever reported anything. Fucking trip down memory lane, that one. I haven't posted any Greentext here before, but I have read some OC, and feel like I have to share a couple that my parents told me happened to them. Be my dad and mom. Dad is a long-haul truck driver. They are driving along the I-49 on the way to Lafayette to make their delivery. Small note here, truckers have to log their hours, and back in the day, you could fudge them a bit to make your load on time. Father wants to get the fuck there. Some receivers are notoriously slow. Father has delivered here before and knows if he does not make it by a certain time in the morning, he will be sitting there all morning/day. Hauls ass. Truckers have pretty strong bladders. Mother is complaining she really needs to use the bathroom. On pretty remote part of the I-49, but there is rest stops along the way with bathrooms, albeit dirty ones in most spots. He eventually gives in and pulls into one. No trucks or cars or anyone around at all. Mother gets out to use it. Father waiting in the truck. He'd go with her if there were any others around, just to be sure. Father does not carry a gun, just a crowbar behind the seat. The cabs have air ride seats, which are pretty comfy honestly. He just idles the truck and updates his logs. Mother comes back and hops in the cab. Dad is finishing his logs. Out of nowhere, this, and these are his words, drug fiend from hell jumps on the co-driver door and bangs on the windows, completely naked, screaming unintelligibly. He fucking floors it, which is tough to do when you have to jam through that many gears. What he recalls, he thinks was a female, climbed from the steps of the truck and onto the top of the front of the cab, licking the window and banging on it. He tries running the windshield wipers and sprays washer fluid to get her off. She persists. They are in the middle of nowhere at 2 a.m., and this bitch came out of nowhere. He ends up getting to speed and starts slowly weaving the truck around. A 53-foot trailer behind you makes it hard to maneuver. Dad climbs to over 60 plus miles per hour, and eventually this entity just flops off of the truck and rolls over what he told me assumed was her death/dismemberment. Even my mother can recount this story to a T every time. Second story here. I am not sure how familiar X is with the term lot lizard, but they are pretty much ladies of the night who prowl around truck stops for tricks with lonely truckers. My father brought me for a trip while I was on summer break. Be me and my dad. Ran out of hours, had to stop at the pilot truck stop. I was hungry and had to piss really bad. Think I was 6 or 7 at the time. We needed showers as well, as we were on the road for 2 days without one. We pull in, and there is almost no parking, so we have to park way near the back in what is not technically parking, but an overflow stop. We go in and eat and shower. After that, we are walking through the parking lot, and at that age, I didn't know shit about sex industry, but there were lizards everywhere. Dad puts me to bed in the top bunk, so he can do his logs and crash for the night. CB radio is still on. Usual bullshit. My dad leaves it on because it is entertaining. Safe to say, these lizards buy them just to advertise services. Switch to channel X, baby. Do you need some company? Dad usually turns it off, but that night he left it on for some reason. Start hearing some woman screaming on the main channel for truckers. She is screaming, "Help me, help me." Who told you could fucking... Frequency goes dead. Other truckers start chatting about it on the frequency, trying to figure out which truck it is. Dad turns the CB off. Never heard what came of that, but it was basically some other trucker kidnapping and assaulting a woman, and she got hold of the talkie to beg for help. She never came back on the frequency, and the police did not show up or anything, and it was the only truck stop around.